Very happy that you guys are here to hear more about Paradym, the product we've been working out on and are now in a beta launch period. Any of you who did not already register for Paradym, you are now officially, congratulations, in our beta program. I added you to the list this afternoon, which means that if you go to Paradym to the sign up page, you can just make an account, no problem. That's in case you want to go along with the instructions, because we're going to do a lot of building. We're going to do a lot of real showcasing. So feel free to type along or write along if you want to. But first, we're going to chat a bit. So some short introductions. We're Anna and Timo. Well, from Paradym in this case, but originally from Animo Solutions, our original company. And we're here today to show you everything you can do with Paradym and hopefully show you how easy it is as well to work with and to integrate into your solution. Feel free to email us. I always say we're in the trying out stages, so any feedback and all feedback is very welcome. And we're still very much looking forward to any opinions anyone might have. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a quick introduction of Paradym. So this is mostly what can you do with it? What did we create it for? Go into the workflows and actions of the product. And then we're going to get right into building it. So Timo will show us how to build the first workflow, how to use the API, and also how to integrate it with like a demo environment. So an actual front-end application. Basically, we're trying to show you that within this one event time duration, you will be able to create what we have spent months and months working on in some cases to implement for others. So let's get right into it. I have the Q&A at the end, but please feel free to ask any questions throughout. We don't have too much people here, so just either use the chat or raise your voice and feel free to ask the questions whenever they come up. I'll open the chat as well. Yeah. So Paradym. Our company Animo Solutions, we are implementers. So we're a development and consultancy company for solutions that involve verifiable credentials. And we've been doing that for about 3.5 years. And what we've noticed is it's really, really difficult. It was difficult 3.5 years ago. It's still difficult now. And we've solved the same issues so many times that we decided to build Paradym, which helps you automate any solution involving digital identity. So we're trying to make using verifiable credentials as easy a choice as it would be to use any other technology or SaaS product. Because what's standing in the way? We've seen it again and again. So it's, first of all, very difficult to find expertise. I think those of you already a bit familiar with the ecosystem will know this. It takes a long time to train people to have them get to a certain expertise or knowledge level. And then once they get there, it's still very time consuming to actually use verifiable credentials in such a way that it probably takes over most of your development timeline, which a lot of people don't want. They would just rather use the tech. And I think a big pain point as well is the interoperability landscape. So the standards currently are a bit clearer because governments are making decisions, but they're also more unclear than ever. So everyone's working with different standards and protocols, which means that implementation is, well, conflicting, and especially if you just get started. So to solve this, we created Paradym, which is a SaaS product. So you can use it on a monthly basis. It works similarly to GitHub Actions, I always say, but then for verifiable credentials. So you create workflows, they have actions, you can combine them in any way, and they just run in the background of your application. What we've tried to solve with Paradym is exactly the problems I was just talking about. So it's very low entry barrier. The Paradym workflows can replace like folders of code with maybe like 40 lines of code or a couple workflows. And it kind of abstracts everything away. So all of the infrastructure, you don't have to manage it yourself. All of the joining working groups because you have to understand the specs, it kind of abstracts all of that away. It basically defines workflows. So you use YAML, which is also, I think, very accessible. And they just run in the background for any digital identity transaction. Basically, you set it up once. And then once you have the workflow there, there's a couple of components. So we have a name, a trigger, input, and then basically a bunch of actions. Once you have it set up, it will just execute based on the actions you have defined. So it can stay on hold for quite a while until, for example, your end user takes the next step in the flow, and then it'll just continue on as planned. This is what an actual workflow looks like. So you'll see this much more in a bit when Timo is working on the actual building part of it. But I just wanted to show that it's pretty clear, like pretty manageable with the actions and trigger and inputs. And this is the workflow editor that people will be working in most of the time. So currently we can handle all basic credential interactions. So we're still working on revocation. We've noticed that people really wanted to take the next step, but we decided to launch without it to get some initial feedback in. We already have manual and API input. Well, we have a lot of plans for our roadmap. I'll go into them later in the presentation. But most of the default flows are already available. We're also still working on, for example, cloud wallets. So we also have a Paradym mobile wallet, but we've noticed for a lot of organization use cases, a cloud wallet is desired. So we're already working on that as well. And just to clarify, is that Paradym can be used, the platform can be used as an issuer and or a verifier. So you can create workflows for any of those use cases. And we have the Paradym wallet as a holder wallet to complete the ecosystem. And obviously, like, we're still working on all of the standards and interop, but obviously any of these parts should be replaceable at any time. So you could use it just as an issuer, just as a verifier, or you could just use the mobile wallet, which is already free and available in app stores. I'll post a link in a bit. I think then we're just gonna go right into building. Timo, unless you have something to add before you start, otherwise I'll hand it over to you.
No, I think we can get started. All right, let me share my screen. Cool. Okay, so as we said, we have 3 parts today with the live building session that cover different aspects of Paradym. The first one is like building our first workflow, working with workflows, actions, publishing the workflow, and then executing it, and also integrating it with the Paradym wallet. So let's start in the Paradym dashboard. If you've created your account, you will get on this overview with like an empty page. I have already some workflows in my dashboard. And the first thing we can do is we can create a workflow, because everything in Paradym is based on workflow executions and building workflows. So I can, for example, let's start with a very simple one. As if I start with an example workflow, I create one, I give it a name, and a very simple, basic workflow template will be created. Once you're done writing your workflow, you can publish it. And once it's published, you can go to the execution step to execute a workflow. So once I execute it, this is just like an empty workflow. You can see it will immediately go to completed because there's no input, there's no actions to be taken, but we have completed the workflow execution. So that's the basic steps of, like, you write your workflow, you save it, once you have published it, you can start executing it and running your workflow as many times as you want. So what we actually want to do now is we want to start building a workflow that actually does something. So the Paradym documentation has a lot of actions on, let me see if has a lot of documentation on building workflows and actions. So when you start building, I definitely recommend you to go to docs.paradym.id. And there's general outline on like, how do you build a workflow? What are the different components involved, which Anna already mentioned a while ago, like the name, the triggers, the actions. It has some workflow examples. Then we have actions, and the actions are all the different things you can currently do. In the future, we have intentions to add like that you can write your custom actions. So you can write some code to add your custom functionality to Paradym. And we will also have like a marketplace where you can install other actions. For now, we have this default list of actions and are working to expand that, which allow you to do the basic credential exchange interactions. And another thing that I definitely recommend to check out is the example workflows. In the example workflows, there's some common scenarios which you can use as a basis to build on top of. So we can start with a simple one, which is creating a credential template. And a credential template is the combination of a schema and a credential definition. And we need to create these to define which properties are in the credential that we are going to issue. And we usually only have to execute this once. So for this workflow, I can just copy it and I can then go back to my created workflow and I'll just paste it in. And basically what we have here is we have a workflow to register a credential template. We can trigger it through the API, which you can also trigger manually through the UI then. Later on, we'll get to some more advanced trigger types. We define some of the input. This one is quite complex because we just allow you to copy paste it and allows you to find some input fields, such as the attribute names, the name of the workflow, a version, and also on which network we want to deploy it to. Then we have the two actions, which is creating a schema, and then we also create a credential definition. So workflows will also always execute the actions in order. So we have the top one here. This one will be executed first. And then once the top one is completed, this action will be executed. Using the $sign, you can reference variables in your workflow, which, for example, if we have defined in the input a property named attribute names, then we can reference the attribute names by using $.input and then referencing the attribute names. We can do the same for the output of other actions. So the create schema action, once it has completed, we can reference the output of that action as the input to another action. This makes that workflows, like actions in a workflow, can build on top of each other to fulfill the whole flow. So in this case, once the schema is created, I want to create a credential definition executed. So let's save this, publish it. And if I again now go to the execution step and manually execute it, it now has an automatically generated form in which I can provide all the input values for. So let's say today we want to create a Paradym event attendee credential, and we can register it. For now, we'll do it on the check testnet. You can use on the free tier, only the testnet is available. For all the paid tiers, you can also write to the main nest, which is really meant for more the production use cases. We can provide a version, and then we can provide the attribute names. For now, I'll do the event and the date on which you attended the event. And then I can execute the workflow, and then it will start executing. So the first state, like last time, it went to completed immediately, but now it will start running because it will start running the first action. Once that's completed, it will automatically go to the next action. So if I click on an execution, I can see the latest info. So I can see which of the input I provided, and I can also see the output of the different actions. So now it has completed. The create credential definition is also done, and I can copy this. And for now, I'll just copy it, and we'll later reference it when we start to actually issuing a credential. All right. So with that in place, next thing we're going to do, we're going to build a workflow that actually issues a credential, and I'm going to build it from scratch because that will also show like the editor, the online workflow editor that we have, and how it helps you in building workflows with its suggestions. So we want to create a workflow that issues a Paradym event attendee credential. Give it the name. I'll create the workflow, and then again, we have an empty workflow. So I'll keep these as is. And for this workflow, we don't need any input. We'll just make a very simple credential, and we'll just use some actions. So if you have an action and you type dash and then a space, it will give you suggestions on which actions you can execute and like you can add. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a connection with the Paradym wallet. That's where we're going to issue the credential to. And so we'll call the create connection action. This is a very simple action. And so it also doesn't require you to provide any attributes, but I could provide extra attributes here to, for example, say, I want to provide an image URL, so a wallet could render that, or I could provide a label that is shown to other parties if I don't want to use my default team name. For now, I'll just use it as is. And once I've created a connection, I want to issue the credential. I'll again do the dash, I press issue credential, and it will autofill a big part of what I need to do to issue a credential. One thing we need to provide that first now is a connection ID, and we just created this with this action. And as I explained in the previous workflow, we can reference the output of previous actions by using the $sign. And I can reference actions, then I can reference the ID of the action, so the one we use here. I'll copy that. I can go to the output, and this one has a connection ID. And the structure of the output can be found in the Paradym docs. So if I go to
autocomplete also for that in the editor?
Currently, no. We will add that in the near future to add autocomplete for these as well. So there's autocomplete for the input, but for variables that have been referenced, there's no autocomplete yet. Yeah, so if I go to the docs.paradym, you can see in the action list, if you define, choose the action. So I'm now issuing credentials. You can see the issue credential, or actually this is the create connection. I can go to the specific action, and here I can see also documentation for the input, and I can also see the output. So the output contains a connection, and the connection will then have a connection ID of value string. So now I know that I can reference that here. And then the second thing is I want to issue an ANOCRED credential. Currently, Paradym only supports issuing ANOCRED credentials, which is a specific credential format. If you know what it is, then that's good. If you don't know, just use ANOCREDs, and that's also good. So again, I can get suggestions here, and the fields I need to provide are the attributes and the credential definition ID. The credential definition ID we created in the previous workflow, and I copied the output credential definition ID from there, and I'll just paste that in here now, because we know it will always be that credential definition ID. The second one are the attributes. So I created the credential template with 2 attributes, which were the event. This is the Paradym live building session. And we had a date. The date today is 19 September 2023. And with this in place, I have now everything to create a connection and then issue a credential based on the credential template. I will save it, publish it, and I can now, again, execute this workflow through the UI. So what we see now, if I execute this workflow, it will go into an on-hold state. And this is something which Paradym handles for you, is that not all flows, such as like when creating a credential template, are like completed directly. Sometimes we need flows that are dependent on other tasks, other systems, or something a user performs. In this case, we want to connect to a user wallet. And so the workflow won't complete until we have created a connection with the wallet. So we can do that by usually scanning a QR code. If you integrate through the API, you would normally embed this onto your web page, for example, and create a QR from this. So in this case, I have a very handy tool that generates a QR for me, and I can directly scan that with the Paradym wallet. So if I open my phone here on the side, I have the Paradym wallet open, and I can show the QR code. And I can scan that with the Paradym wallet in this case. Once I've done that, it will start loading the invitation, and the workflow will become running again. And then it will automatically issue the credential to my wallet. So on here, you can see I have been offered a credential from Paradym with these fields. And again, the workflow has gone into an on-hold state because the credential has been offered, but it's not accepted yet. So I can now choose to accept it in my wallet. And once it has been added, I now have it in my wallet, and the workflow will complete. So now the credential has also been issued. This was the whole flow from issuing a credential. Cool. So the next thing we can do, and now we're getting really into a bit more advanced flows, but is we can trigger workflows on different things than just API. We could, for example, we could, for example, we can change this workflow to, instead of like run on a trigger type API, we could run this whenever a connection is completed. And we can then remove this part because we won't create a workflow anymore. We won't create a connection anymore in this workflow, but we will actually take it from the input. So this is a special one, and we have like 2 ways currently to trigger workflows. You can go to the docs again, and the first one is API execution, or through the UI, in which we'll just manually execute the workflow whenever you invoke one. But another one, how we can run workflows, is based on agent events. And agent events is, for example, whenever a connection has been completed, or when a credential has been issued. So you can run side tests after issuing a credential. For now, if I run this same one, I save this, I can now go to the execution step. And as you can see, I can't execute it anymore because we don't have an API trigger. It's triggered based on events. And the event is that whenever a connection is created. So I can write another workflow that creates a connection that will then trigger that other event. And this shows how different workflows can trigger each other to trigger the events that you want. So I'll create a workflow called create invitation. And in here, I'm going to have a trigger type API. I don't need any input. And I'll add a single action. And instead of create connection, I'll now use create invitation. So we just create the invitation and we don't wait for the connection to complete. And in here, I can provide attributes. And the attributes that I will provide is reusable, which means this invitation can be used multiple times, as often as you want it to be used. This way, I can basically create a public invitation to connect to us that can be printed on a QR code and can be reused whenever needed. So I publish it, I execute it, and it will start running again. So I have an invitation URL here now. And if I open my Paradym wallet again, I create a QR code from this. And I will run this, scan this QR code. It will again start loading the invitation. And as you can see, I again received a credential from Paradym. Not because this workflow ran, but instead the other workflow that I built to issue the event credential that now triggers on a connection completed has been executed, and I can accept this again. So this way you have multiple ways to trigger workflows, and depending on your needs, like you can customize how workflows run. Okay, so if I don't know if people have the Paradym wallet themselves, but you can also try it out by, if you want, you can scan this QR code from my screen, and just whenever somebody connects, it will issue a credential to you. So I can leave it open for a bit here. Are there, like, I think we completed the first two sections now. So are there any questions from people on like this process of building workflows and executing them through the dashboard and the UI?
So I was wondering the credentials that are issued using this workflow, what kind of private keys are associated with that in the mainnet? And is there an option to configure that, or do you automatically generate them, or how does it work?
Yeah, so the private keys associated with it are like when the credential definition is created. So when you create the template, we generate private keys and we store those on our platform. And then whenever we issue, we use those private keys. So there's currently no way to configure that. Because with Anonymous credentials, there's a specific type of keys you use to issue. Once we are going to add support for OpenID and W3C credentials, there will be more flexibility in like which type of private keys are used for which credential types.
Okay.
So if you have specific needs based on this, please also share that with us in the Slack, so we can know like what is important to you for this.
You have super exclusive rights in which I can just move everything up in our priority list right now.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone has the Paradym wallet and was able to scan this QR code.
Check.
Yes, it worked.
Cool, that's good to hear. Yeah, so that's just a simple thing like this. This is not a real scenario or something, but like it is very powerful to use these different trigger types and yeah, trigger workflows based on that.
Yeah, I have a short question. How do you figure out what, as an issuer, your public key is that is associated with your private key? I mean, do you go to, yeah.
Yeah, so with Anocred's credentials, the way you do that, because every attribute in a credential is signed using a different key. So based on the credential definition ID, you basically have the public key information that you can resolve then from a public ledger. We use the check network. And so the credential definition ID is basically the trust anchor. And I could, if you share your credential definition ID with me, I would have enough information to fetch the public keys from the check network and do the verification.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can quickly show it also. Let me see. So this is going to look like a lot of gibberish, but so this is the created credential definition ID for the current credential. And as you can see, there's a field date and there's a field event. And this is a very long string, and this is the public key that is associated. And currently I resolve that from resolver.check.net, which is like a public resolver for items on the check ledger. So based on that, we can do that verification. Cool. So I think next step is I have a demo that I can show, which shows also executing workflows through the API, and then finally also integrating that into a real life example app based on the API calls. So we have a repository available, which is available on our GitHub, which is Paradym Example University Courses. And this is an example application where we show integration with the Paradym API. It is a Next.js React app, if you're familiar with that. And it has some code to integrate with our API. So we have some actions to verify course credentials, and that integrates with our API. And it builds on top of a certain set of workflows. So let's set this up here first in Paradym, and then we'll execute it to the API, and then later I'll show how to integrate it with this example application. So to start off, we'll register the course credential template. And one of the nice things about workflows in this case is that, yeah, for example, we could also add these workflows to our GitHub repository and know, like, all right, how do I get to the state where I was? So let's create a new one, and I'll create a new workflow. And what this does is basically the same as the first register template, but here we already defined like the specific fields that we need. So we have a course certificate, we have a version and attribute names. The only thing that's configurable is the network, so we can easily switch between running this in development or production. So I'll execute this. Now again, I'll do the testnet. And it will create these templates. So while that is running, I'll go to the next step, which is a way to issue a course certificate. I can copy this workflow as well. And I'll create a new workflow, issue course certificate. And I can also paste that in here. And this takes in a few fields, like the student number, the name, and the course that was completed. And it will first create a connection, and then it will issue a credential. We still need to update it with our created credential definition ID. So I'll quickly go to the register course credential, and I'll extract the created credential definition here. So we can then use that. Let's see. All right. Issue course certificate. I'll paste it in here, and then we can save and publish it. So this is now also ready to execute, and I could execute it again through UI, but I now want to show you how you can integrate with our API. So if you go to the settings tab, there's a few pages, things available in the settings, and one of them is the API key. API keys allow you to call our API, and you can manage them here. And I'll create an API key. And once it's created, I'll get an API key. Don't worry, I'm gonna revoke this afterwards. So, once I've created the API key, I can use this to call the API. So to get documentation on the API, we have api.paradym.id. And in here, we have Swagger documentation on how you can call our API. Currently, there's only 2 endpoints, and it's very simple. You build your workflow in the online editor. And once you've published it, you can execute it through the API, or you can get the status for a workflow execution through the API. There's also more documentation on how you can execute a workflow in our documentation. There you can see like how it works to create an API key and how you can trigger an execution using the API with, for example, an example curl request. So now that I have my API key, I'll go to Postman, and in here I have prepared some executions. So this one is ready to call the workflow. First thing I need to do is I need to set my access token, so I can call the Paradym API. And next thing I need to do is I need to know which workflow I want to call to issue this course certificate. I can find the ID of a workflow in the execution step. So if I go to the execution step, I have an ID here. And this is the ID of my workflow. So once I copy that, I can put it in here. Now I have everything ready to issue a course certificate, which say Timo Glastra has completed Introduction to TypeScript with my student number. So I'll execute this now. It will call our API. And let's also open up the Paradym wallet again. And you can see the workflow has been created. And in the background, it has started running. So if I fetch the latest status, you can see it has changed to waiting for a trigger, which is the same as the on hold state. And we now have the invitation URL. I created a thing that calls a Google API to quickly generate a QR code. But again, normally you would integrate this to your application UI. So we have the QR code. I can scan this. And then it will, in the background, it will continue with running the workflow again. So now I have, I forgot to disable the other workflow. So now I also get this credential offer from Paradym, but I also got this course certificate. So I get this course certificate with Introduction to TypeScript, and then I'll accept it. And I also have this course certificate in my wallet now. So if we go back to the UI again, I'm quickly going to disable this workflow because I don't want to issue a credential anytime a connection is made anymore. The final thing we have to do to set up is the verification. So in here, I have another example workflow, which is a one to verify a course certificate. And in the input, I can say I want to, which course I want to verify, and then it will create a connection. It will request a presentation of that course from the wallet. And finally, we'll validate the return value to make sure that the course matches the course that we want to complete. So I can't just provide any course. I need to have completed the specific course. So let's copy this. Let's save it. Verify. And paste it again here. So with this workflow, we need to also update the credential definition ID that we created to make sure we verify that the credential was actually issued by an anchor we trust. Currently, we are both the issuer and the verifier. In other scenarios, it may be that someone else created a credential definition and issues the credential, and you just allow it to be verified. And if there's multiple issuers, for example, in an ecosystem, you can just provide multiple restrictions. And this means that any of these credential definition IDs is valid to satisfy this request. So if you have a list of universities, then you could accept them all in a request. For now, we just accept this one credential definition ID. So let's publish it. And the same thing as with the previous one, we're going to note down the execution ID so we can execute it in here. I also prepared this one, which calls an execution and update the workflow ID. Now, when I execute this, it will create a proof request that we can use to verify that I have completed the introduction to TypeScript. If I get the execution, we have another invitation URL, and based on that, I can again create a QR code. Let's scan this again with my Paradym wallet. It will parse the invitation, and it should receive a proof request for the execution of for the oops. Let's see if something went wrong here. So we have the invitation URL. Let's try that one more time.
I think you are missing the L at the end.
Yeah, I don't think you copied the whole thing.
Where? In which
The
thing?
invitation URL.
Yeah.
Ah.
This was a test to see if we were all paying attention and we all passed.
Okay, no.
Oh, you missed way more than the L.
yeah. But I take it from here, and this automatically generates it based on the. So it should.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try one more time. Otherwise, I maybe made a mistake in my workflow. Yeah. So now it's still running the. I removed the one workflow. That's it. But now in my wallet, I have a course credential request, and when I open that, it shows that it wants to know the course that you've enrolled in. I can accept the data to be shared, and if that's shared, then if I get the execution again from Paradym, it should have in the go to the overview. Yeah, so it has created the presentation exchange, and that has been sent to the wallet. Let me now finally remove this one so I don't get the same credential over every time. So the last thing we can do is we can now integrate these workflows that we have here. We can start integrating them into an actual application. So Jan prepared a repo that the repo I just showed you here for the example. And you can run it and you will get this UI where you can get courses, enroll in them, and complete them. So one thing, you can just clone it, and there's a few steps you need to complete, which are explained here. So like registering your credential information, which we did, and creating the other workflows, creating your Paradym API key, which we also did, and now we're ready to set the environment variables. So in here, we have the .env.example, and we can copy that .env.example, and then in the .env, we can update the values for our application. So we created our Paradym API key, which I'll paste here, and we need to provide the workflow IDs. So we have an issue course certificate, which we already copied from the dashboard for API execution. And we have a verify course certificate, which you can also copy here. So with this configured and our workflow is configured in Paradym, we can now run the application. And I'm going to run it in dev mode for now. So it should be running. And if I now go back to my browser and go to my local host, I have my local web app running. So in this case, I'm Tom Lancer. I'm a developer that works at Animo, and I'm already signed in to my university overview page where I can see like which courses I'm enrolled in. And as it states now, I have a certificate that's ready to be retrieved for introduction to JavaScript. And so we can first start by completing that workflow. So I have already completed this course, and I can claim a certificate to get that into my wallet to prove it later on. This will now start in the background a workflow execution, and we can again scan the QR code to create a connection between Paradym and the wallet. And once a connection has been completed, I'll get my credential, Introduction to JavaScript, which is issued to Tom. I can accept this in my wallet. And once it's accepted, the certificate issuance is completed. So in the background, this uses a workflow to issue this credential, which we also manually executed through the API before. So I have now completed this one. I have my credential, and I can look for other courses that I can enroll in. Now that I know JavaScript, I would also like to know more about TypeScript. And as you can see, to enroll in the TypeScript course, I need to have completed the introduction to JavaScript. And I'm going to enroll here, and it will again start a new workflow to request a proof of my credential. So scanner again. So again, we will create a connection, and we will get a request from Paradym to share a course certificate. I'll accept it. It will be shared. And once it has shared, we get an error because unfortunately our credential did not match the required one for this course. We don't support selection in the wallet yet, which will be added in the next few weeks. But that means it will pick the first one. And because I have multiple course certificates, it actually picked this one. But if I were to have one credential in my wallet, this flow would have succeeded. But that does, like if we go to the workflow now, to the verify course certificate and executions, you can see this one failed. And why did it fail? Because the JSON schema validation failed. Because we required the credential to be equal to the introduction to JavaScript, but the actual value that was presented in the credential itself was introduction to TypeScript, and that's not what we want. So based on this, like the workflow will fail and say like, hey, I expected this credential, but yeah, you provided this one. So based on that, we now have this fully end-to-end application that in the background uses Paradym to handle the credential workflows, issue credentials, and verify them. There's one last thing I want to show, which we won't go into very in depth today, but that is like, how would you integrate with Paradym and get live updates? And that's by using webhooks. Webhooks allow you to get notified of changes, and you can expose an endpoint in your server where you can receive webhooks of updates that are happening. So I can, a popular site to get to the test webhooks is webhook.site, which will just give you a unique URL where you can send webhooks to. Normally you would expose this on your own website, of course. And I can also create a webhook now, live building session. I paste in the webhook URL, I create it, and I get a secret that is used for verifying webhooks, so you know Paradym actually sent it. But yeah, today I won't use it, but when you really do this in a production scenario, you should verify that the webhooks sent by Paradym are signed using this signature, which allows you to verify that, yeah, no one else is calling your API endpoints.
Will you also start supporting authentication on the webhooks?
Authentication in which form?
Could be multiple forms, of course, but basically having a webhook which requires authentication, so that you would fill out some authentication details in here, which would allow only an authenticated call to the webhook.
Yeah, that is a possibility. Like if you have specific needs, we can add that. For now, this is a very, yeah, it's a simple way to expose an endpoint and also allow the case to verify that the webhook was actually authorized and sent by Paradym and not somebody else. But yeah, we could implement other mechanisms if those are preferred over this one.
Right.
Yeah, we chose this one because it's a very common practice for online services to use a like a signature on the HTTP payload.
Yeah, true. But in enterprise systems, you also typically encounter authentication on webhooks as well.
Yeah,
so that's where my question comes from.
Yeah, no, that's definitely possible. So if we, for example, were now to issue a credential again, so let's say I have mastering Rust programming, I can complete the course. Normally it wouldn't be this easy to complete the course, but today it is. I can claim this certificate, and then it will again start executing a workflow, which I can then scan using the Paradym wallet. And what we can see happening now, if I go to the webhook.site, you can see I have received notifications here that a workflow execution has started. And you can see more are popping in here, which says like it's now waiting for a trigger or as an action executed. And once I accept it, more will come in. And this allows you to react to changes in your workflow execution, which especially for long running workflows where the user, like let's say you send a user an email and he may respond in a few days, then whenever something changes in the execution of a workflow, you can react to it and you can know like my workflow execution is now completed, or this action is now ready. So we can now see like the issue credential action has been executed. Yeah, so
Timo, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to get a few questions from the chat in that maybe you could elaborate on a bit.
Yeah.
Lohan was wondering what the future plans are for other DID methods besides checked, and also why we chose checked.
Yeah, good one. So let me open the
I already talked a bit about the business reasons, so that we could move a bit quicker using checked, and also that we could do a bit more attractive pricing. But maybe you can go into the more technical future plans.
Yeah, We chose check because it's for us an easy DID method to integrate with, which specifically focuses on identity. And we have also explored Hyperledger Indy as an alternative, but decided to not go with that in the end. So for us, checked is a very good one to start out with and go to production. But we are really open to hear what other DID methods you want to use. We don't just want to add DID methods for the sake of it. So if you have specific ones you want us to support, then let us know. And we're open to support any DID method. Like with the introduction of the W3C credentials and OpenID for VC, which are scheduled for early next year, we are definitely going to support DID Web and DID Key for like non-ledger based DIDs, and may support others based on need.
Great. And then another question from Ockert about for potential buggy workflows. So how do you suggest debugging? What level of validation do you apply in the flow language?
Yeah, so buggy workflow, do you mean like when it's wrongly implemented, or like when something unexpected happens in a workflow, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have currently in the editor itself, we have syntax validation, right? And we're also currently adding like identifier and link validation that's scheduled for soon. And then for all the rest, there's error handling, right? And you can check out the errors in the logs.
Yeah,
Yes.
So
I don't know potentially what can go wrong. So I mean, you'll have more insight on this.
Yeah. So currently, like we already try to add a lot of validation, and if I do something that is wrong, so let's say I remove this field, it will give you saying like it's missing property version, and if I were to publish it, I can't publish it now because I have errors in my workflow. We intend to extend this to a lot more. So also like when you reference a variable, let's say I do connection ID 2, that you get errors, and that way make it mostly impossible to have errors in your workflow. If you do have to have errors during the execution that we couldn't catch up front, then we get like we try to be very clear in the error messages. So in here it displays like something went wrong while executing the verify course action, and that it went wrong during the validation of the JSON schema because the course must be equal. So yeah, we want to expand on that way. If you have specific things you would like to see, then also please let us know because we can add it in.
Thank you.
I've also added the link to the community Slack. Come join us if you want, then you have a direct line to Timo, and he'll wake up in the middle of the night to answer your Slack questions. I think we're about through with our time, Timo, so I'd like to close it down so everyone can get to their respective dinners or lunches or wherever you are. I just wanted to say thank you very much for attending. We'll also publish this. Join the beta, play around with it. Let us know anything you think we could improve or want to improve. There's a free tier, so it won't break the bank. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us and letting us show you our product that we're very proud of, and have a great evening.